The South African United Business Confederation says the business community can't afford to be a passive bystander in the fight against gender-based violence. So a 2014 study commissioned by the Sonke Gender Justice organization found that gender-based violence costs the economy between 24 and 42 billion rand every year. Victims spend more time away from work, in hospital, and of course are even killed. Now the Business Confederation's CEO, Jacki Mpondo-Hendricks, joins us now here at the round table for more on the story. Jacki, thanks very much for coming into studio.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's great to see you on such an incredibly disturbing story. Yeah. And the crime statistics released by the police minister last week gives us a sense of those shocking numbers.
Correct. And I think with the COVID-19 lockdown, that actually even worsened the situation. If you look at the statistics, especially around rape, for example, and you look between April and June 2021, comparatively speaking to the previous year, there was a 72.4% increase just in rape. So those are very alarming and disturbing numbers.
Those are the reported cases.
Those are the reported cases, correct, because a lot of the cases remain unreported. And that's also something that we need to look at. But from a South African United Business Confederation perspective, we're on the verge of the 16 days of activism. We believe that now is the time that as business, we need to positively respond and react to the call that was made by President Cyril Ramaphosa on the 11th of March in 2021, where there was a clear and clarion call for private sector to no longer just throw money at GBV, but to actively get involved with deliberate plans of action. And I'm very keen to engage and discuss that and to begin to interrogate how GBV impacts on the economy of the country at large, and also to move it and to transcend it from being a private or domestic issue into it actually being a social issue with economic impact and consequences.
So I want to perhaps just take a step back and for you to tell us about the SA United Business Confederation, who you are and who you represent, what your mandate is.
Okay. The South African United Business Confederation is a confederation that represents the cross-sector interests of business. It's a non-profit and non-racial organization that has as members business associations, trade councils, and chambers. We represent the interests of over 70 primary members, which represent, in essence, over 1.2 million SMMEs in this country who collectively employ close to 6 million people. So it really does give us the voice in terms of beginning to influence and direct positive change that is business-led in this country.
So of those primary members, when you talk about, business can no longer be a passive bystander to the scourge of gender-based violence, what are you saying about the policies that businesses, and perhaps your members in particular, do have in place?
Primarily, actually, we are a policy advocacy group and voice, and this is where the issue really resides, is that GBV has not really been constructed as a expression within policy framework within the business community. And this is one of the reasons. Still.
I mean, that's still. In a situation like South Africa, it's surprising.
Correct, especially if it's viewed as a pandemic. And this is why the research that has been done through Dr. Courtney Davis, who's the associate professor at UJ, becomes so key and critical, because what she discovered was that up to today, there is no expression of GBV in any form of corporate communications, in any form of even corporate social investment indexes. There is also no expression of GBV in HR policies. And over and above that, even in terms of the impact of GBV on the economy at large. The last research that was actually done that is quantified was in 2014. Yeah, and so until such time that we can quantify and qualify GBV, it really weakens our position in being able to push for it from a policy advocacy perspective.
So that's why the gap is so big, 24 to 42 billion rand as the impact of the economy.
Correct. Because even when I looked at the figures, I mean between 0.9 and 1.3% in terms of the impact on the economy, that's a large, that's a huge amount, which then means that a lot of what we are doing at the moment is based on estimations and guesstimations, and that is not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we get business to respond, though, isn't it?
Yes.
For us to quantify the impact on your bottom line
Correct.
is likely how we're going to get businesses to respond. So
Correct.
when we say there's no policy expression in terms of GBV in corporate South Africa, what would that policy expression look like?
Firstly, before we even get to the policy expression, you mentioned something very interesting in terms of what would be the pressure points on business. One of those pressure points is trade unions. And one of the conversations that we're currently embarking on is to have those discussions with trade unions and to say that when they negotiate for favorable workplace conditions, that GBV should be featured in such as one of the key and critical issues of consideration. Because if the unions then start pressuring private sector and business to incorporate that, then at least we will gain more momentum around the issue. So that's a starting point. Now, when we look at what kind of policy, how it would be framed, obviously you would look at issues such as, firstly, preventative measures, yeah, and beginning to understand that if they say that 1 out of 4 males are potential abusers, it means that 1 out of 4 males within your organization are potential abusers. And what kind of preventative programs would you put in place? And when the issue does arise, what kind of measures do you have in place to deal with some of those issues? And how do you begin to monitor, track, and evaluate that? And this is why we have recognized as the SAUBC to reach out to other organizations around the world who have already initiated such action. And we have reached out to the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse in the UK, led by Ms. Elizabeth Fulken, who will also be part of the webinar session tomorrow, where she will then present some case studies on what they have managed to implement internationally as well, so that we can use that as a guide on how we then begin to inform and effect policy direction in South Africa that supports GBV within the workplace.
It's a difficult one, though. I mean, obviously we understand the importance of looking at other countries where such policies are enacted. But to find a country that is comparable to South Africa, that's where we need to go, don't we? Because we've got the highest GBV numbers in the world. Violence against women and children is the highest in South Africa compared to anywhere else. How do we, on that basis, track and trace a policy and its successes?
Correct. That's a very valid point. What we would do is use some of the learnings and adjust it to obviously reflect the realities of our society, because it's definitely not the same. There are different nuances that are at play. But what is important will be the monitoring and tracking, because for me, it's always important that we also set specific milestones that are achievable, so that we can then begin to say, evaluate our performance against something that is tangible. So, I mean, ambitiously, people would say that we want to have a society one day where there's zero tolerance for GBV. But realistically speaking, it would need to be a broader discussion that involves various stakeholders for support and buy-in.
It's not a simple solution.
It's not a simple solution at all. And it's also multifaceted, because you are not just a person at work, but you also then, you are a person at home, you are a person in community at large. And sometimes you also need to understand some of the trigger points for violence as well, you know, because it could be at work, it could be at home, it could be a lot of other factors that we are currently not putting into play. It's a very complex question.
So we want businesses to respond. We want trade unions to get involved. You know, 16 days of activism begins again in a few days' time in our country. It's a day that activists will tell you is, or it's a few days that activists will tell you is there just to pay lip service to what government says it's doing, that it doesn't make any real difference in the lives of survivors of violence against women and children. What's government's part in what you're trying to do here?
I cannot speak on behalf of government, but what I also want us to recognize is that civil society has made inroads. It might not be enough, but certainly they have made a difference in terms of gender-based violence, even in terms of awareness and also localized community support for victims and even perpetrators around rehabilitation, etc. From a business perspective, and this is our stance as the SAUBC, is that we cannot leave our fate to government only. Is that as business, we want to lead a social transformation process that is business-led, with or without government. Wow. Ideally, we would want government to support the initiative, but government has set the ground rules. Government has the policies in place from a macro perspective. I think it's up to us now as business to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty.
And that's the criticism of business, isn't it? When it comes to dealing with representation in the upper echelons of corporate South Africa, that's been the criticism, that business is not doing enough on its own. It wants the government regulation to come in. And this is where you're answering the question around a response to gender-based violence.
Correct. And there's another sensitive issue there, taking into consideration that a lot of business is also led by men. Now, if once again, if I go back to the figures that get thrown around 1 out of 4 being a potential abusers, then it also presents its own challenge when most of the decision makers are males as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me thank you for your time this morning.
Absolute pleasure.
It's been great talking to you. Jacki Mpondo-Hendricks is the CEO of the South African United Business Confederation as we build up to 16 days of activism in just a few days' time.